The morning sun streamed through the tall glass windows of JFK International Airport as a woman in her mid-30s walked confidently through the sliding doors, rolling her sleek navy blue carry-on behind her. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, complementing her tailored cream blazer and dark slacks. As one of the country's top neurosurgeons, she had made this trip countless times before, but today felt different somehow. She checked her watch. 2 hours before her flight to Los Angeles, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech at a prestigious medical conference. Perfect timing, she thought, adjusting the strap of her leather laptop bag. The first-class ticket had been booked months in advance, a small luxury she allowed herself after the grueling hours she spent in the operating room saving lives. The terminal buzzed with its usual morning energy. Business travelers clutched their coffee cups like lifelines, families corralled excited children, and airline staff moved with practiced efficiency. She made her way to the first-class check-in counter, where a shorter line promised a quick start to her journey. The smell of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe wafted through the air, mingling with the familiar airport sense of cleaning supplies and luggage. She pulled up her digital ticket on her phone while reaching for her ID, a routine she had performed hundreds of times. Her mind wandered to the presentation she'd be giving, mentally reviewing the groundbreaking surgical technique she developed for treating previously inoperable brain tumors. The research had taken 5 years, 3 grants, and countless sleepless nights, but the results had been worth it. 28 successful surgeries so far, 28 lives changed forever. The check-in agent, a woman with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses, barely glanced up as she approached the counter. "Economy check-in is over there," she said flatly, pointing to a significantly longer line across the terminal, her eyes already moving to look past her to the next person in line. "Actually," she replied with a warm smile, holding up her phone, "I have a first-class ticket right here." She had encountered these assumptions before. They were nothing new. Kill them with kindness, her grandmother had always said. The advice had served her well through medical school, residency, and now as a department head at one of the nation's top hospitals. The agent's eyes narrowed slightly as she finally looked at the screen. "Could you forward that to our verification system? There seems to be some confusion about your booking." The emphasis on confusion hung in the air like stale smoke, even as other first-class passengers were being processed quickly and efficiently at the adjacent counter. She maintained her composure, breathing deeply as she forwarded the ticket information as requested. The presentation folder in her bag contained life-changing research, the kind that could revolutionize neurosurgery as they knew it. She wouldn't let this moment derail her focus. Still, she couldn't help but notice how the agent's demeanor shifted dramatically when assisting other passengers, her professional courtesy appearing and disappearing like a light switch being flipped on and off. More passengers joined the line behind her, their quiet murmurs growing as the minutes ticked by. She stood there, dignity intact, as the agent made call after unnecessary call to verify her ticket's authenticity. Through the terminal windows, she could see planes taking off into the bright morning sky, each one carrying hundreds of stories, hundreds of destinations. Little did she know, her story that day was about to take an unexpected turn that would not only change her journey, but would spark a conversation that needed to happen in airports and businesses across the country. Her phone buzzed. A message from the conference organizers confirming the final schedule. They were expecting her, along with hundreds of other medical professionals eager to learn about her breakthrough procedure. She glanced at her watch again, noting that 15 minutes had passed since she first approached the counter. Around her, the airport continued its morning dance. But at this counter, time seemed to have slowed to a crawl. 20 minutes had now passed at the first-class check-in counter, and the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The agent had made her third phone call, each one seemingly more unnecessary than the last. While other passengers breezed through with quick smiles and efficient service, she stood there, her first-class ticket repeatedly questioned. "I'm sorry," the agent said, not sounding sorry at all. but we need to do additional verification. Her fingers tapped slowly on the keyboard, her eyes barely meeting the accomplished doctor's gaze. Perhaps you'd like to check in at the main counter while we sort this out. The suggestion was pointed, clearly hoping she would simply walk away. The doctor took another deep breath, remembering all the times she'd faced similar situations, in medical school, during her residency, even sometimes with patients' families. I appreciate your thoroughness, she said calmly, but I've flown first class with this airline many times. My ticket and ID are valid. I'm not sure what additional verification you need. Behind her, the line had grown longer. She could hear the whispers, feel the stares. Some were impatient, others curious, and a few seemed to understand exactly what was happening. A businessman in a sharp suit lowered his phone, having recorded the last few minutes of the interaction. Another passenger shook her head in disbelief. The agent's voice took on an edge of irritation. Ma'am, if you continue to be difficult, I'll need to call security. The threat hung in the air like a heavy cloud, despite the fact that the doctor hadn't raised her voice or shown any sign of aggression. She had simply stood her ground, ticket in hand, waiting to be treated like any other first-class passenger. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside. She thought about her patients, how they trusted her with their lives, yet here she was, being treated like an imposter over a plane ticket she had rightfully purchased. The agent pressed her lips into a thin line and reached for the phone again, this time calling for a supervisor. More minutes ticked by. The doctor checked her phone. Another message from the conference organizers, asking for her arrival time. She had planned to review her presentation one last time in the first-class lounge before the flight. That possibility was quickly slipping away. Finally, a supervisor approached, his Navy uniform pressed and badge gleaming. But instead of addressing the situation, he merely echoed the agent's skepticism. Ma'am, there seems to be some confusion about your booking class, he began, as if she hadn't been standing there with proof for the past half hour. Other passengers were now openly watching the scene unfold. A woman in business attire had her phone out, likely sharing the incident on social media. Two elderly couples whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The terminal's usual bustle seemed to fade into the background as this small drama played out at the check-in counter. The doctor pulled up her airline status on her phone. Over 100,000 miles flown this year alone, most of them in first class. She showed this to the supervisor, who glanced at it dismissively. We still need to verify the ticket purchase, he insisted, despite the clear evidence in front of him. Through the terminal windows, she could see her scheduled plane being prepared for boarding. The morning sun now streamed fully through the glass, warming her face, reminding her that time was passing. She thought about her presentation, about the lives that could be changed by her research. She hadn't worked this hard, come this far, to be treated like this. The whispers behind her grew louder. More phones were raised, recording the incident. The supervisor's walkie-talkie crackled with routine airport communications, a sharp contrast to the tense silence at the counter. What happened next would not only change the course of her day, but would spark a conversation about dignity, respect, and the subtle ways discrimination persists in everyday life. The doctor's patience was wearing thin as she stood at the counter, now approaching the 45-minute mark. The supervisor's presence had only made things worse. Instead of resolving the situation, he seemed determined to find a problem where none existed. I can show you my hospital ID as well, she offered, reaching into her bag. She was the head of neurosurgery at one of the country's top hospitals, though she hated having to prove her worth this way. I'm scheduled to give the keynote speech at the International Medical Conference in Los Angeles this afternoon. The supervisor barely glanced at her hospital ID. That's not relevant to your ticket verification, he said dismissively. Perhaps there was a mistake in the booking system. These things happen. His tone suggested the only mistake was her daring to stand in the first-class line. By now, the crowd of onlookers had grown. A flight attendant walking by slowed down, taking in the scene with a frown. Several passengers had moved out of line, standing to the side, phones recording everything. The morning light through the terminal windows cast long shadows across the floor, marking the passage of time like a sundial. "There's no mistake," said a voice from behind her. A well-dressed businessman stepped forward, his phone still recording. "I've been watching this whole thing. She showed you a valid first-class ticket almost an hour ago. What's the real problem here?" The supervisor's face reddened slightly. "Sir, this is a private matter between the airline and the passenger. Please step back." But more voices joined in, the dam of silence breaking. "This is ridiculous," called out an elderly woman in a floral dress. "I just checked in for first class in 2 minutes flat. Why are you giving this lady such a hard time?" The doctor stood quietly, her posture straight, her dignity intact. She'd faced discrimination before, but something felt different this time. The support from strangers, their willingness to speak up, touched her deeply. Yet she couldn't help thinking about her patients, her research, the lives waiting to be changed by the surgical technique she developed. Another businessman stepped forward from the growing crowd. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, addressing the doctor directly. "You mentioned the International Medical Conference. I'm heading there myself." The supervisor tried to intervene. "Sir, please, we're handling this situation." "No, you're creating a situation," the businessman interrupted. He turned back to the doctor. "I'm actually flying my private jet today for the conference. As the CEO of a private aviation company, I must say, I'm appalled at how you're being treated." The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone in the back started clapping slowly. The supervisor's walkie-talkie crackled again, but he seemed at a loss for words. The check-in agent suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. The doctor felt a subtle shift in the air. This moment wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been judged unfairly, every professional who'd had their credentials questioned because of how they looked. She thought about all the young medical students she mentored, especially the ones who worried they wouldn't be taken seriously in their careers. The businessman's offer hung in the air like a lifeline, not just to Los Angeles, but to something bigger, a chance to show that dignity couldn't be denied, that respect wasn't something you had to beg for. The conference organizers had texted again, wondering about her arrival time. Soon, hundreds of medical professionals would be waiting to hear about her groundbreaking research. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, its light now streaming directly through the terminal windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage. What happened next would not only change the course of her day, but would become a powerful statement about standing up to discrimination in all its subtle forms. The terminal had become unusually quiet, with more and more passengers stopping to watch the scene unfold. Phones were raised everywhere, recording what had started as a simple check-in and had turned into something much more significant. The morning light caught the edges of these devices, creating tiny sparkles throughout the crowd. A young medical student, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "I've read your research papers," she said to the doctor, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Your work on brain tumor removal techniques. It's revolutionary. I can't believe they're treating you like this." Her words carried across the now hushed terminal, making the airline staff shift uncomfortably. Other witnesses began sharing their own stories in hushed voices. A tech executive mentioned similar experiences at corporate events. A professor spoke about discrimination in academia. The crowd had become more than just onlookers. They were now participants in an unplanned but powerful moment of solidarity. The businessman who had offered his private jet remained nearby, his presence a reminder that there were alternatives to accepting unfair treatment. He spoke quietly with other business travelers, their heads shaking in disbelief at the situation. Some were already on their phones, sharing the story with colleagues and on social media. Someone from the back of the crowd called out, I've got the whole thing on video, from the moment she showed her first-class ticket. Others nodded, confirming they too had captured the events. The supervisor's face had gone from red to pale, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of the situation. A flight attendant who had been watching the scene approached the counter. She wore her airline uniform with pride, but her expression showed she was troubled by what she had witnessed. "I've seen this passenger in first class multiple times," she said to the supervisor. "She's one of our regular premium travelers." The check-in agent, who had been so dismissive earlier, now seemed to be frantically typing into her computer. The supervisor pulled out his phone, likely receiving messages from airline higher-ups who were becoming aware of the situation. The power of social media was already at work, turning a local incident into something much larger. Through it all, the doctor maintained her composure, though her eyes showed both exhaustion and determination. She checked her watch again. The conference organizers had sent another message. Hundreds of medical professionals were expecting to learn about a surgical technique that could save countless lives. Her research couldn't be delayed by bigotry disguised as procedure. A group of international travelers watched the scene with particular interest, speaking quietly among themselves in various languages. One of them, a distinguished-looking woman, approached the doctor. "In my country," she said with a gentle accent, "we've read about your medical breakthroughs. This is not how a person of your standing should be treated anywhere in the world." The crowd had grown so large that airport security officers appeared at the edges, not to intervene, but to ensure the growing gathering remained peaceful. They too seemed unsure of how to handle this situation, one that required no security response, but rather a long overdue reckoning with everyday discrimination. The businessman who owned the private jet was now having an animated phone conversation, likely making arrangements. Other business travelers had pulled out their laptops, some typing emails, others posting about the incident on professional networks. The story was spreading beyond the terminal walls, becoming a testament to both the persistence of discrimination and the power of witnesses to stand up against it. The morning had fully bloomed outside, the sun now high and bright. Through the terminal windows, planes continued to take off and land, a reminder that the world kept moving. But here, in this space, time seemed to stand still as everyone waited to see how this moment would resolve. A moment that was quickly becoming about much more than just a first-class ticket. The private aviation CEO stepped forward once again, this time with purpose in his stride. He had just finished his phone call and approached the doctor with a warm, professional smile. The crowd parted slightly, sensing a pivotal moment was about to unfold. "I've made all the arrangements," he said quietly, ensuring his voice wouldn't carry to the entire terminal. "My jet is fueled and ready. The flight crew is preparing for departure right now. We can have you in Los Angeles with plenty of time for your keynote speech." The doctor listened carefully, her mind working through the implications of this offer. She glanced at the airline counter, where the supervisor was now on his phone, likely speaking with higher management. The check-in agent had mysteriously disappeared altogether. "That's incredibly kind of you," she responded, matching his professional tone. "But I want to be clear, this isn't about finding another way to Los Angeles. This is about something bigger." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Though I must admit, ensuring I make it to the conference is crucial. There are patients counting on this research." The CEO nodded understandingly. "Exactly why I'm offering. I attended your presentation last year at the Boston Medical Symposium. Your work is too important to be delayed by." He gestured vaguely at the check-in counter. "This." The crowd around them had grown quieter, trying to catch their conversation. The young medical student who had spoken earlier was practically bouncing with excitement, hoping the doctor would accept the offer. Other passengers were still recording, their phones capturing what was becoming a powerful moment of karma. "The jet seats ate comfortably," the CEO continued. "I noticed several other medical professionals here who might be heading to the same conference." He glanced around at the crowd. Perhaps we could turn this unfortunate situation into an impromptu networking opportunity. A small smile crossed the doctor's face, the first one since this ordeal began. The idea of transforming this moment of discrimination into something positive appealed to her deeply. It aligned with how she'd handled challenges throughout her career, with grace, dignity, and an eye toward creating positive change. The supervisor had finally finished his phone call and was approaching again, this time with a very different demeanor. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for the delay. We can process your check-in right now and upgrade you to our premium first-class service at no additional charge." The doctor raised her hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. The terminal had gone completely quiet, everyone waiting to hear her response. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried across the space without effort. "I believe I'll be making alternative arrangements today," she said, her tone professional but firm. The CEO smiled beside her, already pulling up the private jet's departure details on his phone. The crowd's energy shifted, a collective sense of satisfaction filling the air. Someone in the back of the crowd started clapping. The applause spread slowly at first, then built into a full ovation. The supervisor stood awkwardly, his offer of an upgrade hanging uselessly in the air. Through the terminal windows, beyond the regular passenger planes, a sleek private jet could be seen waiting on the tarmac. The doctor reached for her carry-on handle, ready to leave the counter behind. The young medical student stepped forward again. Would it be possible to hear a preview of your presentation during the flight?" she asked, hopefully. The CEO chuckled warmly. "I think we can arrange that." As they prepared to leave, the doctor turned back to the supervisor one last time. "I suggest you use this as a teaching moment," she said quietly. "Because I assure you, this story won't end at this terminal." She gestured to the dozens of phones still recording. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating her path away from the counter toward a different kind of first-class experience. One based on respect rather than prejudice. Standing at the counter one final time, the doctor pulled up her airline app and clicked the Cancel Ticket button. The simple action felt weightier than usual, like closing the door on something bigger than just a flight. The supervisor watched helplessly as the cancellation notification popped up on his screen. "I'd like a full refund," she said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to making life-changing decisions in operating rooms. "And please note that the reason for cancellation is discriminatory treatment at check-in." She kept her tone professional, but her words had an impact that made the supervisor wince. The crowd that had gathered continued recording, their phones capturing every moment of this resolution. The airline staff, now hyper-aware of being documented, processed the refund with unusual speed. A new check-in agent had appeared, frantically typing at the computer, trying to do damage control. "We really must insist," the supervisor began one last time, but was cut off by the CEO. "I think you've insisted quite enough for one day," he said firmly. "The doctor has made her decision." Other business travelers in the crowd nodded in agreement, some already on their phones spreading the story through their professional networks. The young medical student who had spoken up earlier approached with her small rolling suitcase. "I'm also supposed to be on that flight to the conference," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "I'd like to cancel my ticket too, please." The solidarity of the moment wasn't lost on anyone watching. Two other medical professionals from the crowd stepped forward as well. One was a researcher who had cited the doctor's work in his own studies, the other a surgeon who had traveled from overseas to attend her keynote speech. They too began the process of canceling their tickets. The supervisor's face had gone from red to ashen as he watched 4 prestigious conference attendees withdraw from the flight. His walkie-talkie crackled with urgent messages, but he seemed frozen in place, watching his mistake snowball into a PR nightmare. The doctor pulled up the conference organizer's message and calmly typed a response. "Slight change of plans. Arriving by private jet. Will be there with time to spare." She allowed herself a small smile as she hit send. thinking about how her grandmother would have loved this moment. The CEO checked his watch and gestured toward the exclusive terminal exit. "Our car is waiting to take us to the private aviation terminal," he said. "The jet's already being prepared for departure." The way he said it made it clear this wasn't just a flight anymore, it was a statement. As they gathered their belongings, more passengers from the original flight began approaching the counter, some asking about canceling their own tickets, others demanding to speak to higher management about what they had witnessed. The ripple effect was immediate and undeniable. A flight attendant who had watched everything unfold slipped the doctor her business card. "For when you file a formal complaint," she whispered. "I've worked here 15 years. This needs to change." Her small act of solidarity added another layer to the morning's events. The doctor took one last look at the counter where her day had taken such an unexpected turn. The terminal's usual buzz had changed to tone, charged with the energy of something important happening. Through the windows, the private jet gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of how quickly fortunes could change when people stood up against discrimination. They began walking away from the counter, their small group growing as they picked up other conference attendees who had witnessed the scene. The clicking of their shoes on the terminal floor seemed to echo with purpose, each step taking them further from prejudice and closer to something that felt like justice. The walk through the terminal felt different now. Where the doctor had arrived alone just hours ago, she now led an impromptu procession. The CEO walked beside her, while the young medical student and other professionals followed close behind. Passengers turned to watch them pass, many already watching viral videos of what had happened at the check-in counter. "Your grandmother's life-changing moment video is going viral," someone called out from the crowd. Another person held up their phone, showing a social media feed exploding with shares and comments. The hashtag #FirstClassDoctor was already trending, accompanied by clips of the incident and messages of support from around the world. As they passed the airline's first-class lounge, several premium passengers stepped out to watch. One of them, a senior businessman, shook his head in disappointment. "I've flown 2 million miles with this airline," he said loudly enough for the airline staff to hear. "After seeing this, I'm reconsidering my loyalty." The group approached the exit leading to the private aviation terminal. A well-dressed driver waited with a sign, ready to escort them to the jet. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. From being denied basic respect at check-in to receiving VIP treatment, all within the span of a morning. Behind them, the main terminal had erupted into activity. Airline officials in suits had finally arrived, too late to prevent what had become a viral moment of public accountability. They huddled with the supervisor, their faces grave as they scrolled through their phones, watching the incident spread across social media. "Doctor," called out an elderly woman who had been watching everything unfold, "you handled that with such grace. My granddaughter wants to be a doctor, and I'm going to tell her this story." The doctor paused briefly, touched by the comment. She walked over and spoke quietly to the young girl standing next to the grandmother. "Study hard. Medicine needs strong, determined voices." The terminal's usual announcements continued overhead, a strange backdrop to this unexpected morning drama. "Final boarding call for Flight 2317 to Los Angeles," the voice announced. The very flight she had been scheduled to take. Several passengers waiting to board looked uncomfortable, some even stepping out of line to cancel their own tickets. As they reached the private terminal entrance, a reporter from a local news station had somehow already arrived. "Doctor, would you like to comment on what happened this morning?" she asked, microphone extended. The doctor smiled gracefully, but shook her head. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. The young medical student could barely contain her excitement as they walked through the exclusive private terminal. "I can't believe I'm going to hear your presentation on the private jet," she gushed. "This is even better than first class." Several others in their group nodded in agreement, the unfortunate morning transforming into an unexpected networking opportunity. Through the terminal windows, they could see their private jet waiting on the tarmac. Its sleek form gleamed in the late morning sun, a far cry from the commercial plane they'd originally planned to take. Ground crew members were loading their luggage with extra care, aware of the VIP nature of this particular flight. The doctor paused at the private terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking back at the main terminal where her morning had started so differently. She thought about all the times in her career when she'd faced similar prejudice but had no recourse. Today had been different. Today, people had stood up, spoken out, and shown that change was possible. As they prepared to board, someone in their group checked their phone and laughed. "The airline stock is already dropping," they announced. "Looks like discrimination is bad for business." The CEO nodded knowingly, adding, "Sometimes the best response to prejudice is success." The private jet's interior was a world away from commercial first class. Butter-soft leather seats, polished wood panels, and crystal glasses caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. But it wasn't the luxury that made this flight special. It was the conversation that unfolded at 30,000 feet. "I've been thinking," the CEO said as they reached cruising altitude, "about how to turn this morning's incident into lasting change." He pulled out his tablet, showing a draft of a corporate initiative. "What if we created a program to address customer service bias across different industries?" The doctor leaned forward, intrigued. The young medical student and other professionals gathered closer, turning the cabin into an impromptu think tank. "The problem isn't just in airlines," one of them pointed out. "It's in hotels, restaurants, retail stores, anywhere people make snap judgments." Through the jet's windows, they could see the landscape rolling beneath them, a reminder of how far they'd come from that morning's confrontation. The flight attendant, who had been quietly efficient, approached with refreshments and couldn't help but join the conversation. "You know what struck me most?" she said, setting down their drinks. "How many people started recording? 10 years ago, this might have gone unnoticed. Now, accountability is just a phone click away." The others nodded, understanding how social media had changed the game. The doctor pulled up her presentation slides on her laptop. "Maybe we can add a section about bias in medical settings too," she suggested. "I've seen brilliant medical students doubt themselves because of how they're treated." The young medical student nodded vigorously, clearly relating to the observation. Someone checked their phone. Reception was surprisingly good at this altitude, and gasped. The videos hit 2 million views. They turned the screen to show everyone. The airline's clumsy attempt at damage control was being overwhelmed by supportive comments from around the world. "Look at this," another passenger said, showing an email on their phone. 3 other airlines have already reached out with first-class tickets for future flights. The CEO chuckled. Too late. They should have thought about inclusion before this went viral. The doctor was only half listening to these updates. Her mind was already working on something bigger. She opened a new document on her laptop and began typing. "We need a training program," she said thoughtfully. "Something that helps people recognize their own biases before they act on them." The plane's engines hummed steadily as they drafted their plan. It would include real-world scenarios, testimonials, and concrete steps for businesses to follow. The CEO offered to fund the initial rollout, while others volunteered their expertise in different areas. The young medical student watched in awe as these accomplished professionals turned a humiliating incident into a movement for change. "This is better than any lecture I could have attended," she said, taking careful notes on her phone. Outside, the jet cruised smoothly through clear skies, far above the clouds. Inside, ideas flowed freely. They discussed training modules, accountability metrics, and ways to encourage businesses to participate voluntarily before legislation forced their hand. "The conference isn't even going to be the biggest thing we accomplish today," someone remarked, and everyone laughed. The flight attendant brought around another round of refreshments, this time staying to contribute her own insights about customer service training. The doctor paused in her typing and looked around the cabin. Here they were, a diverse group of professionals, turning a moment of discrimination into a blueprint for change. It wasn't just about one airline or one incident anymore. It was about making sure the next generation wouldn't have to face the same barriers. 1 month after the airport incident, the doctor stood at a different podium, this time addressing a packed auditorium. The video of her experience had done more than just go viral. It had sparked a movement. Corporate executives, customer service trainers, and diversity experts filled the room, all eager to be part of the change. What happened that morning wasn't just about a first-class ticket. She began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. It was about dignity, respect, and the power of people standing together. The CEO who had offered his private jet sat in the front row, nodding along with her words. On the screen behind her, statistics told a compelling story. The airline's initial fumbling response had cost them millions in canceled memberships and lost loyalty program participants. But more importantly, their very public mistake had forced other companies to look at their own practices. The young medical student who had been on that private jet flight was now running a student organization at her medical school, dedicated to addressing bias in healthcare. She sat in the audience, beaming with pride as her mentor continued to speak. In the past 30 days, we've received over 5,000 stories, the doctor continued, gesturing to the screen. People sharing similar experiences, not just from airlines, but from hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and yes, even hospitals. The audience murmured in recognition. The training program they had drafted on that private jet was now being implemented by major companies across the country. What had started as a conversation at 30,000 feet had grown into a comprehensive initiative for changing corporate culture. Social media had played its part. The original video, now viewed over 50 million times, had spawned countless discussions about subtle discrimination and the importance of speaking up. But it wasn't just about calling out bad behavior, it was about creating real solutions. The airline eventually issued a formal apology, she said, allowing herself a small smile. But more importantly, they're now one of our partner organizations, helping to develop new training protocols. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. In the audience, several of the passengers who had witnessed the original incident sat watching. They had become part of this story too, their recorded videos serving as teaching tools in the new training programs. Some had even become active advocates for change within their own industries. The flight attendant who had slipped her business card that morning was there too, now working as a consultant for the initiative. Her inside knowledge of airline operations had proved invaluable in designing realistic training scenarios. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures, the doctor continued. Sometimes it comes from people simply refusing to accept disrespect and others refusing to stand by silently. The audience broke into applause, many rising to their feet. As she concluded her speech, the doctor shared one final slide, a photo of her grandmother, who had always told her to kill them with kindness. The wisdom of those words had proven true in ways her grandmother could never have imagined. The CEO stepped up to announce the initiative's next phase, a nationwide rollout of the training program, backed by major corporations and educational institutions. What had begun as one woman's humiliating experience had transformed into a movement for lasting change. Outside the auditorium, a new generation of professionals waited to speak with her. They carried with them their own stories, their own hopes for change. The doctor smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. Sometimes the best response to discrimination wasn't just success. It was creating a path for others to follow.